Alrighty, awesome. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. My name is Maggie Chen. I am the Chief Development Officer at the Journal of Young Investigators at JYI. This is our first of our series of career panels today at our first ever annual conference. And this panel is focused on non-academic pathways in science. So I'm currently a junior at Harvard College, which is my current background. I study developmental biology and the history of science. And I conduct research on cardiac regeneration. So I'm going to pass it off to Rahul Anand, who is my co-host here. He will be introducing himself as well as the panelists before we get started. So Rahul, off to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Rahul Anand and I'm currently a junior at UT Dallas. I'm studying neuroscience and public health, and I look forward to this conference. So I'm delighted to introduce our speaker, our panel speakers today. Dr. Ranjan Batra is the Vice President of Research and Development at Locana Bio, a San Diego-based biotech company focused on creating gene therapies to modify dysfunctional RNA. He is an expert in modeling and therapeutics of RNA-mediated diseases. Dr. Neil Hoffman is a scientific advisor in the Office of the Deputy Administrator in the Biotechnology Regulatory Services, USDA APHIS, where he provides scientific expertise to the USDA administration, advice on how to address novel, complex, and scientific issues, and how to develop and implement initiatives to improve the oversight of biotech crops. Dr. Emily Roberts is a personal financial educator and specializing in early career PhDs, launching the platform Personal Finance for PhDs. She previously studied bioengineering at Duke University. Dr. Chris Cloney is a PhD graduate in chemical engineering who helps build profitable businesses so that they can be truly independent in their career, lifestyle, and research directions. He runs Grad Blogger, a platform that empowers academics to build their businesses via blogging, podcasting, and video.
Wonderful. So for our attendees, the Q&A box is open and we'll have some time at the end in case you have any questions for our panelists, and we'll be asking those questions. So please do submit questions. Alrighty, so to get started, the initial question that I think all of us are very curious about is, ooh, I think we lost somebody. That's okay, he'll rejoin, I think, but we can get started with the first question, which is, could you speak to your scientific work as a student and what you studied, and how do you think that has impacted where you are now and your career path? Let's maybe get started with Dr. Roberts, who's first on my screen.
Sure thing. So my PhD is in biomedical engineering. I specifically studied drug delivery. But I have to say that the way that my career has gone now, I would not say that the specific field of biomedical engineering impacts it or that I do really anything in that field. What's important for what I do now is that I have the PhD training, have been through that process because now I serve people who are either currently in graduate school or have been through the PhD with respect to their finances. So it's really important for people who are, in my audience and my followers to be able to relate to me in that sense and understand that I get where they're coming from. But it wasn't anything, specific about my research that, brought me to this point. It's just important that I also went through the process and have come out the other side of it.
I see. And do you, like, from what you said with relating to your audience, how does doing a PhD, like, how does that connect people? Like, what is that experience like? Could you speak a little bit to that?
Yes. Well, specifically with respect to finances, which is my area, people who have been through PhDs have very different financial situations from people who got a bachelor's, but then went on to, start their career without any further education right at that point. Or they're also quite distinct from people who went down the MD route or another kind of professional degree. The finances are completely different. And so a lot of times people who have been through a PhD feel behind financially, behind those other peers. And they also, behind peers who just have a bachelor's, for example, but they also don't have maybe the high salaries that are commanded by people who get MDs, or maybe not JDs so much, but other kinds of professional degrees. So they're just a really different population. And what I've found is that, people who are in that population are very interested in being spoken to, directly, and having content tailored for them, because a lot of the content in the personal finance space is not really about that route. So that's kind of the gap that I fill.
Wonderful. Great answer. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it off next to Dr. Batra. If you could take a stab at the question.
Yeah, sure. In contrast to Emily, I think my PhD and my postdoctoral trainings have been really closely associated with what I do. I've held 2 industry jobs. One was at Google Life Sciences, now called Barely, and now at Locana Bio. And during my PhD, I studied, my PhD was in genetics, and I studied genetics of RNA-mediated disease. And I also did, during my postdoctoral training, postmortem pathology. So my first job was postmortem pathology at Google Life Sciences, and actually really predicting responders versus non-responders to different kind of therapeutics using AI. So it's very closely related to my postdoctoral work. For my current job, actually the company spun out of my foundational work at UCSD. So it's a direct product of that. But speaking to that, I mean, I did my PhD in these RNA-mediated diseases, and that's what we study. So at Locana Bio, we are targeting RNA for therapeutics, and some of the diseases that we are taking forward into the clinic are the ones that I studied for my PhD.
And sort of for your path, you went into the biotech industry. Was that sort of a natural progression after your academic work, or did you ever think about maybe going into academia as well?
It wasn't. It was a serendipitous thing that happened. So after my postdoctoral training, I applied like a lot of other people for faculty positions, and I got 3 different offers in 3 different parts of the country. One was at Case Western, one was at Duke, and other one was in Texas, Houston. And I was considering some of those when an opportunity came along to go to Google Life, and the idea was pretty novel. They simply wanted to ask a question: what happens if you put a scientist, an engineer, a software engineer, and a couple of people from other disciplines in a room? What comes out? It's a very novel, like, young idea, I would say, and thinks right for this forum. So I wanted, I wanted to explore that. I basically took a big turn, and some of the people, I think my mentors were like very surprised when I made that decision. But I think I wanted to carve my own path.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Alrighty, I'm going to go to Dr. Hoffman right now. So Dr. Hoffman, I think we may have missed the question there, but the question was, could you speak to your scientific work and training as a scientist and how that maybe impacted your career now?
Sure. So I was trained in plant physiology. That's what my PhD is in. And I did a series of postdocs. One postdoc was to learn some molecular biology. And from there, I went on to academia. And I always tried to continue to learn and teach myself new things. And as an academic, I worked in the area of molecular biology and biochemistry and cell biology. So I really strove to have a wide multidisciplinary background. I was in academia for 11 years, and this now is in around 1999, there was a movement. I don't know, maybe movement's not the right word, but there was a trend where biotechnology companies were starting, and genomics was becoming very popular, and especially in the agricultural sector. And I had an opportunity to go into a startup company, and I took that opportunity, and I was there for working in a functional genomic startup company for 3 years. And then that company wasn't going to make it, and so I left and I went to the government, and I've been there ever since. And I really like working in the government. My science background, I'm a science advisor, and I advise policy people about science. So it's a lot of education, educating people who are very smart but don't really know the science. And I found it very rewarding. So it's an unusual, most people in the academic, in going through a PhD, go into academia or industry, but the government really has a lot to offer for scientists. So I highly recommend that route.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear that, scientists as yourselves are the people influencing the public policy and the one, really advising the scientists. So that's probably a really great thing. Awesome. So last but not least, I'll shoot it over to Dr. Cloney for the question. Dr. Cloney, if you could unmute yourself and take a stab. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you for organizing. I know it's not that easy to herd everyone and get us all at the same place at the same time, but we appreciate it. And thank you for everyone who tuned in. So I would say, and I'll give a bit of background on my academic research, but I really fit in the middle of all the things we've heard. So, and I see Dr. Roberts nodding her head because we know each other for a number of years now. So she's done her PhD in biomedical engineering, and she sort of doesn't use that except in relating to people today. Dr. Batra mentioned that he's really invested in what his PhD is. Dr. Hoffman mentioned that he's sort of used it to connect and advise policyholders. I use my academic research to connect and advise industry stakeholders, but generally not the scientific folks. So my academic research was in industrial safety, specifically industrial engineering and chemical engineering, related to fire and explosion hazards in processing operations. So what is a processing operation? Well, that's an industry that creates something. So these are everything from sawmills to plastic to the nice shiny MacBook Air you have on your desk, how those get created. In my work, I take the academic side and try then to relate that to what an everyday worker is that doesn't have, may have a grade 12 education, may not have a grade 12 education, maybe university educated, but it's really a role of then taking that through and how do you make that information relatable to those folks, and then how do you influence change? It's all great in your grandstand and say this is what you should do, and information deficit, let's plug all those holes. But if we're not making change in the world, what are we doing? So that's what I've been doing for the last number of years since I graduated in my research in chemical engineering.
Awesome. And I think that speaks to a theme that ourselves at JYI are very interested in as well, which is science communication. How do we make science accessible to the public and combat, scientific misinformation, which I think has become more of a constant theme in the past couple of years. And so I wanted to ask Dr. Hoffman, in light of sort of climate change and this declaration of the climate emergency, how does this really change the way that the agricultural industry operates and the way that policy is shaped and formed? Yeah. I think you're on mute right now.
I'm sure what he first said was very profound.
Sorry
Yes.
about that. There is a trend in agriculture to what's known as precision agriculture, where sensors are used extensively on farm equipment so that the measurements are made repeatedly in fields so that water and nutrients are used in as efficient means as possible. So this has been a trend that's been happening for a long time now to reduce the amount of inputs to get the same amount of yield. And I think over the last 20 years, we've seen that about half as much inputs are used to get the same amount of productivity. So that's one thing that's happening. It's very important, especially water, to be able to minimize the amount of water that's needed for agriculture. And then there's a lot of work going on into breeding crops so that they are more fit, that they're better able to tolerate temperature extremes, high salt. So I think both on those two fronts, on the breeding front and in terms of combination of management and engineering, there's a lot of computer work that goes into the precision agriculture too. The satellites are what are used for making measurements and collecting data. And so this is a big data problem as well.
I see. And what is it like in your day-to-day working for the government? Like, could you speak about what you do in terms of advising scientists, shaping policy, things like that?
Yeah, so a big part of my I would say the last 4 or 5 years of my career was in revising regulations for biotechnology. And that was a major effort. It took us 16 years to get the regulation out. It's very difficult. Every time administration changes, you pretty much go back to square one. So there are a lot of stakeholders that if stakeholders complain to the political people, that can get the regulation squashed. So that was a big effort. So a lot of day-to-day was trying to figure out how we could revise the regulations to make it more a more sensible, more science-based. And so I think I made an important contribution in that regard in terms of how to make those regulations more science-based. So my background was very valuable in that regard. And that's become not only national policy, but it's influencing international regulatory bodies to follow our lead. So it's been very rewarding to take something. When I was in academia, I studied a pathway of 3 or 4 genes, and not even my mother cared about it. And now you could work on something that now is influencing almost everyone who touches biotechnology. So it's really has a big reach through. The other thing I actually spent a lot of my career on was in terms of helping defend our program against lawsuits. So biotechnology, my program is the program in the USDA that regulates biotechnology, and there are organizations that are opposed to biotechnology would sue us to try to limit the amount of use of biotechnology, and especially in the agricultural arena. And so we had a whole series of lawsuits, and the lawsuits are based on procedural statutes. And so we really had to change our practices. So I was involved for 10 years. I was involved in representing our organization to various lawsuits. I was working with our general counsel in the USDA and the Department of Justice. So but yeah, between those 2 projects, that really covers like the last 15 years of my career, was spending a lot of time. And part of making our program more defensible, I was involved in crafting these environmental documents. The hook that the anti-biotechs use is to sue us over environmental legislation. And so we needed to really up our game in how we prepare those documents. So I became very heavily involved in those as well.
I see. Wonderful. It's really cool to hear that you're sort of advising the way that scientists do science. I think that sort of more top-bottom approach is very interesting. And so I think my next couple of questions would go to Dr. Roberts, who similarly is advising scientists. It's a different role than being in the lab and really doing all the science. So my first question for Dr. Roberts is, what made you decide to launch this business? What made you decide to launch personal finance for PhDs?
Yeah, so it directly, grew out of my experience as a graduate student. So I sort of got into the subject of personal finance, for my own purposes. Right after college, I was doing a post-bac year, and then I started graduate school after that. So I was just, sort of in general learning about money and sort of interpreting, okay, well, that's the advice that people generally get, and how can I apply this to me right now as a graduate student? About halfway through my PhD, I started blogging about that subject, sort of my own finances and my spin on things. And through that blog, I realized there was a need among my own, peer group, graduate students and postdocs and so forth, for this personal finance information that's been tailored to their situation. So I was recognizing that need while I was finishing my PhD. And right after I defended, I found myself having a lot more free time. And so I basically turned around, and with an organization I'd been volunteering with during graduate school on personal finance, I volunteered to give a seminar for them on basically, everything I learned about personal finance during grad school that you should know too. It was kind of the theme. And I just found that absolutely, wonderful experience to prepare for that, deliver it and everything. And I in that sense found a calling as like a professional public speaker. And so between those two things of me really enjoying to speak and then also wanting to serve my peer group in an area that I recognized a need in, that's how I launched my business, which initially was very focused on speaking. And now I have a lot more other services and products as well, in addition to the speaking. But yeah, that's the basic story.
Wonderful. And what are the misconceptions that PhD students might have about their finances, and how can they best prepare for the financial strain of taking on a PhD? And I guess from our end too, how can undergrads start preparing early if they want to go into academic research and do a PhD, which means more years of school, more financial stress, all of those things?
Yes. So, one piece of advice, I know this is not right for everyone, but I love to give it out, is work before you start a PhD. Like at least 1, 2, 3 years of work experience can be really invaluable for you getting an idea of the context, the professional context of what you might study later on in your PhD. Maybe you'll decide to shift fields a little bit. That's okay too. Maybe you'll just decide not to get a PhD. Also totally fine. Plenty of great work to be done without finishing that degree. So I would say work, you can also put you in a better financial position going into graduate school. Many students really struggle because they don't have an emergency fund. Maybe they have, of course, student loan debt. Many people coming out of undergrad, maybe they have some credit card debt, maybe an auto loan, medical debt. All of that can be alleviated a little bit by having a proper professional salary before going into the PhD. So that can put you in a really strong position. But the advice for anyone, whether you've taken a break to work or whether you're going straight from undergrad, is to make sure that your PhD is funded sufficiently. And so there's two parts of that. One is that, in case anyone didn't know, people get paid to do their PhDs. Generally speaking, kind of a standard package would be all or nearly all tuition fees completely paid, plus a stipend, a living stipend on top of that. But the thing that is, the next layer down below that is not all stipends are created equal, and not all packages are created equal. And so I think it's really, the advice I love to give to people who have not yet committed to a graduate program is to really investigate, the funding offer that you've been extended once you get to that stage, and whether or not it's sufficient to support you throughout your PhD. Again, this is really broad advice, not necessarily for every single individual, but I would not advise anyone going into a PhD program knowing that they have to take out debt already. That should not be part of the plan from the get-go. Ideally, you'd be paid enough to live on and to make some kind of progress with your finances during graduate school. I really advise people to not, yes, during graduate school, you're technically a student, but I don't think that you should think of yourself as a student, but rather as a young professional. This is the start of your career. You should be paid at the start of your career. You should not be going to further debt at the start of your career in terms of, getting that professional experience. And you should be able to make some kind of progress, whether that's a little bit of saving, some debt repayment, starting to invest is certainly a possibility, but none of that can happen if you're being underpaid from the get-go. So I'd say be really selective, apply to a bunch of programs. And even if the research is a great fit, even if you have a wonderful advisor, the finances are a really valid reason to turn down certain programs if they're really underfunded.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I'm sure that people will find that very helpful moving forward. So speaking about the finances, the biotech industry obviously has a lot of finances involved in terms of funding for VCs, investments, starting a company. So I wanted to quickly highlight Dr. Batra's work first and ask him some questions right now. So could you speak about your work at Locana Bio right now? And you can also speak about your work at Google Life. I think that would also be really interesting for people to hear. What are some challenges that you had to face in terms of from the research side and also maybe from the finance side?
Right. It's a really good question, kind of ties into, what Emily left it at. So I would definitely have to say for Locana Bio, right, it was very helpful for me to do a PhD because, the work is kind of tied to my graduate work. And like I knew the insides and out of the research and what to do about it. One thing that's different when you do your graduate school versus you do your biotech is in graduate school or in postdoc, right? Your goal is to complete a piece of research and write a paper about it, and that's what people really care about. In biotech, that's really not the case. And that's the hard part, because you really want to do rigorous, reproducible research that can lead to, at least in the medical field, that can lead to safe and effective therapies for incurable diseases, right? And you want to put this into people. And how I think about this is like every person that you're doing a clinical study on is not just a data point. It's a data point with a family attached to it. And we go through things, and our family goes through similar stresses in life, and we are subject to something. So these people who have horrible diseases like ALS, Huntington's disease, myotonic dystrophy, other kinds of dystrophies, these families are really stressed. And like this is the most rewarding part of my work, is trying to address these incurable diseases in a short time span. But that's also the difficult part. That's a challenge when you are translating a research or some idea that you have kind of worked out in a dish or in a mouse model. To translate it, it's really, really hard. And there's many failures. It's sometimes as a PhD student or a postdoc, I was naive. Like I was thinking that, oh, this is the next best idea since sliced bread. But when you really try to translate this, it's hard, and you have to be really, really rigorous about it.
For sure.
So that was one of the biggest challenges. In terms of finances, of course, I mean, PhD, like Emily said itself, it's a challenge. You go through financial hardships. And we can talk more about this at the end, maybe how to, maybe do you really want to do a PhD, or do you just want to work? And is that equivalent? To me, it was really helpful. But when you're starting a biotech industry, if you're starting right out of a graduate lab, it's very different, because you can own that work. You may be in a prominent lab already. You can talk to venture capitalists while still getting paid a salary, or maybe a meager salary, but still a salary. You can use your lab resources, although like your intellectual property would be partly or partially or wholly owned by the university itself, but you have a platform. One thing that's difficult is if you've already started a biotech company and you want to start your next one, what labs are you going to use, and what resources where does the first money come from? So those are some of the hard questions and challenge. I think that's a bigger challenge. But when you're in a lab already, it's less of a challenge, and you can kind of slowly talk to the venture capitalists. They're a friendly crowd, although of course everybody's a shark here. So and you want to be savvy about it. There's a lot of resources. We live in the age of internet, so there's a lot available. One thing that can help is aligning yourself with someone who's already started a company. Sometimes you want to take most of the stake for yourself, but it's not a bad idea sharing a little bit of the stake if the other person or the other organization is bringing a lot to the table. So think about that.
And could you speak about your day in the life working as an executive at a biotech company? Are you doing research? Or are you more from the authoritative side, overseeing people who do research?
Right. So we started with 3 people in the lab. So I was doing research. I was doing all sorts of research. I was doing cell work. I was doing, mouse model work. I was also working on a regulatory strategy, and I was also doing business work. Now I think we're about 60. We recently raised our Series B, and we're growing. We're gonna be about 100 people by the end of next year. So my work has become more specialized in mostly scientific and regulatory strategy. So really thinking about the next steps of how to take these therapies into the patients and develop strategy around that mostly. But it's I get to think about this. I get to see the science from scratch, like really from bench to bedside every day, and see the whole picture. So I feel very lucky here.
It's amazing. Yeah, I think we all appreciate the industrial pipeline of biotech drugs, especially now in this pandemic. But I think this theme of sort of owning your work and having power over what you're doing ties really nicely into Dr. Cloney's work with Grad Blogger and sort of empowering people to create platforms for themselves. So I'll bounce it over to you. And my first question is, could you speak to your work at Grad Blogger? Sorry. What made you want to develop this platform, and what lessons have you learned from developing the platform?
Yeah, you got it. And I would say that we are getting a couple questions coming in the Q&A box. So I'd encourage those that are listening to have questions, put them in there, and that will guide some of the conversation towards the end of the session as well. Actually, that's what I do at Grad Blogger. I try to get conversation started. So that's one way you can do that, by asking for questions. But Grad Blogger really grew out of what I was doing with my work for the blog that I started while I was doing my PhD, and then the business that I grew from that. So my blog was mydustexplosionresearch.com, worst website name ever. Nobody can say it. It's really long. It's hard to spell. There's some lessons on how to build a blog. Don't do that. Short, easy to remember would be a much better name. But really, I built Grad Blogger at the start just to share that journey. Okay, I started a blog doing my research. What came out of that? Well, job opportunities, connections globally throughout the world with others that were doing the same research, speaking opportunities, and kind of down the rabbit hole. I went the path of building my own business, which is a viable opportunity, but I could have just easily went the path of taking an employment opportunity. And because I was communicating online, there was much more options available to me than otherwise. Plus, I just got better at talking to people too. That's always a bonus as a scientist, where we struggle with that sometimes. So the more communication practice you can get, the better. That's really what it was with building a Grad Blogger. So it started with sharing my story, moved into, let's find some other folks. I felt like I was the only one in the world, and I was blogging about dust explosions, my academic research, but the only one in the world that was blogging about research in general. Found out that I wasn't. There's groups out there. There was a group called the Self-Employed PhD Group. That's where I met Dr. Roberts a number of years ago. There was a group called Academics Mean Business. And then I can't even count the number of science communication groups, avenues, funding streams, sources that have sprung up since that time, just in the last 3-4 years. So that was really the second phase of what I was doing with Grad Blogger, bringing these people together to share best practice, to share information. And that's a lot of what you'll find on the Grad Blogger podcast and the other kind of material that we create there. So I'll stop it there so we can save and maybe take some questions or whatnot. But I'll stop it so we can save some time for the others as well.
Yeah,
that's the start of Grad Blogger anyway.
Amazing. Yeah, so we'll do the Q&A around 15 minutes before we end. So we'll have plenty of time for questions. No worries there. But like Dr. Cloney said, please do submit your questions. We love when people ask questions. We're scientists. But awesome. I had a little follow-up question to that, because at JYI, we are very focused on science communication. So what do you think is important to keep in mind when you are communicating, very archaic concepts, very scientific, jargon-heavy concepts to the general public? How can we make it easier?
Probably don't do it. Would be people aren't going to like that response, but that's okay. So I mean, you're going to find an uphill battle if you don't frame the material you're putting out there in the frame of reference of your audience. So if you're taking archaic material and trying to speak like a scientist, it's just going to bounce off. The general public's not going to listen to it, or industry's not going to listen to it, or policyholders. You need to really frame it in what's in it for them. So you need to be able to put yourself in their shoes. Building an avatar about who your people that you're talking to are is a really good thing to do. And then understand, what pressures do they have on them. That's one of the first key lessons of just communicating in general. If I'm just talking to you at a coffee shop, we'd probably have a better conversation if I did that to you instead of just talking at you. The same applies for communicating your science online. I'd say the second big thing, and I didn't realize this until I kind of got into it, but it's not so much about communicating new knowledge to the world. So communicating new knowledge to the world can build bridges. It's really big. But translating knowledge from other industries into your industry, or translating knowledge from one group to another, can move mountains. So if you're building bridges by these new information communicating, it's a lot easier to translate something over. So see what's working in other fields. If something's working in biotech, maybe that can apply to agricultural industries. Something's working in agricultural industries in North America, maybe that can apply to agricultural industries and industries in South America. So I do a lot of my time of researching other industries and trying to bring that together. That's a little bit of my, personal preference as sort of an integrator, as a connector, as that's the role I fill. But if you find yourself as a PhD student, I love the research too, but being more interested in these connections than the research, you may be an integrator and a connector, and that's a really great way to help move those industry forward, is to, instead of trying to generate new knowledge and get it out in a new way to a hard to talk to audience, let's pull some information translationally from other industries as well.
Amazing. That's a great answer. So speaking of integration, I think this is a good time to switch to one of our broad questions for all of our panelists, which is, what advice would you give on establishing professional relationships, especially now since we're in very virtual worlds? Do you have any advice that served you well, maybe in your careers, in terms of people you talked to or people who are your mentors? And anybody can start.
I can kind of take that first. I think the most important answer is to collaborate and talk to your mentors, but talk to other people. I still talk to my PhD mentor maybe once a month, or maybe once in 2 weeks. Of course, I talk to my postdoctoral mentors who are close in the city, but I also talk to other KOLs or key opinion leaders in the field. Around. So let me give you an example. So a lot of job offers, right? Not just job offers, a lot of other opportunities to collaborate. They come from people on a daily basis, or sometimes on a weekly basis. If you've met face to face, you're more likely to know a person, what's their background, and likely to trust them. So basically, communication should lead to an establishment of trust, and from that point onwards, that's your real network. I mean, networking is not about okay, well, you talk to someone on LinkedIn, or you send them a message, and you send them your CV. People do not really generally respond that well to it. But if you are communicating on a regular basis and you get to that point where you have trust in each other, that's, I think, where it really starts to become very fruitful.
Wonderful. Anybody else want to add on to that from their personal experience?
I'd like to pick up on what Ranjan said about mentors. I think Ranjan was assuming that people had mentors, and that's great if you do, but if you don't, you better get some, because mentors can really open a lot of doors. And don't just stop at one mentor. You want to have a few, and it's important as the mentee to take the responsibility of that relationship, and to Ranjan was talking about frequent communication. You want to do that with your mentor. I serve as a coach and a mentor in the USDA, and it's kind of funny how sometimes people have contacted me, and it's very structured, and it's like a one-time thing, and that's not, you're never going to get a very good relationship out of that. So mentors can really open up the door for a lot of relationships, and I really agree. I thought Ranjan did a great job in answering that question.
Wonderful. Anything to add from Dr. Roberts or Dr. Cloney?
I do have a different kind of spin on this answer, which is based on how networking is working for me right now, which is actually through my podcast, which I did not start with the intention of it being a networking tool, but it absolutely has turned into an incredibly powerful one. It's given me a way to kind of cold approach people, to invite them on as a guest. And then if they agree, of course, we establish a great kind of relationship. It's a personal experience. It's a one-on-one. It takes an hour or whatever. And they're a little bit flattered, right? Because I'm giving them like a platform, and I think what they're doing is really cool, and I want to talk about it. So that's been a really unexpected networking tool for me. I started as just, I want to produce content for my audience, but it's turned into great networking and more, work opportunities that come my way because of the podcast, because of the guests that I interview, not just, the people listening to it. And so, so this goes over a little bit to grad blogger, but like, if you have a way of establishing a platform, blog, podcast, YouTube channel, etc., even social media, maybe there's a way that you can start making connections with people by, broadcasting your conversation with them to an audience, and they may be more likely to agree than to like a one-on-one cold, pitch of like, I want to, pick your brain over coffee, like sort of situation.
And I guess that naturally leads into me, I guess. So I'll do three things. So one, I'll second the podcasting. The Dust Safety Science podcast. So that's a podcast all about dust explosions in different industries that handle particulate matter. Probably not that interesting to most people that are on this call, but we've done over 100 episodes there, and that's in my PhD industry. So I can reach out to any expert anywhere around the world in my topic and say, hey, here's 20 hours of recordings I've done with people in our industry. Would you like to be the next one? And I mean, not everyone agrees, but a lot bigger number than if I hadn't started that podcast. So the podcast has been exceptionally for me to grow my ability to learn in my industry, from my industry, also to change my industry. So folks like, and we talk about policy, folks like the U.S. Chemical Safety Board have been on my podcast or listen to my podcast. Folks like the National Feed and Grain Association for Agricultural have been on the podcast talking about challenges they have in these industries. And those are just folks that, a couple months out of my PhD, I wouldn't have been talking to other if I didn't have that. So podcast is really great. One that I liked and I kind of stumbled on early was, if you do have a website or a blog, do an expert roundup post, call it whatever you want, but that's really what it is. Email everyone that you know in your industry and ask them a simple question. What is the number one challenge in biotech such and such? Or what is the number one challenge in agricultural industries? What is the number one challenge in personal finance? I did this, it's how I launched my blog. I emailed, I think, 85 people around the world and got 45 responses. Did this nice big post that really get everyone in my industry talking. Well, these are the challenges. Like, print this thing out, get your highlighter out, and there's the things we need to solve in the next 10 years. But it's a great connection tool for me. It's a great way to network and meet people. They probably wouldn't respond to. And so there's some tricks. Email 10 people first, get 5 responses, then email 10 people and tell them that you have 5 responses, then email 20 people and tell them you have 20 responses. If people want to be involved, as other people get in the pool. So there's some ways you can go about actually getting that to roll out. The last one I want to circle back to is the mentors, because they play a huge role. They're really important. You read any books going to tell you got to get mentors, and it is true. But as a person without mentors, it's hard to get into that mindset of asking folks. I've also found it really helpful to have virtual mentors. So somebody who's done something you want to do, they can be alive or dead. That's the nice thing about virtual mentors. And just pick 3 or 4 of those folks and kind of think about, okay, I have this challenge today. I have a problem I want to tackle. What would in my case, Dr. Rolf Eckhoff do, the person who's the most influential in my field, or what would Napoleon Hill do, or what would, so you can kind of, if you get to learn about these folks and decisions they made and what the paths they weren't down, you sort of create this virtual mastermind that you can go and ask anytime. If you sit there in a library and you're talking to yourself, to your virtual mentors, people might look at you funny, but I found that a useful tool to start that relationship. And after that, for a while, you'll probably be like, I really need to talk to a real mentor now. And hopefully I'll get you down the road to start asking some of these folks. If you're not scared, go start asking folks right away. I was too scared to get a bunch of mentors when I started. I have now, but I did a lot of this virtual mentor stuff. So hopefully that's helpful to somebody out there.
Yeah, for sure. I know students are definitely always looking for new ways to get involved and to learn from people who have had more career experience maybe than them. So that's great. All right. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, pick the top, like the people you're putting in a literature review that have wrote the 100 papers in your field. Like, put them up there, learn a little bit about their personal life, or email them directly and get them to be your mentor. That'd be great. But learn about them, learn about how they moved in their career, and think about how that would apply to you, and ask that question: what would so and so say about this situation? It's a great way to get some answers.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I think people are a lot more receptive than others might immediately anticipate. I feel like people are generally very nice about mentoring students and giving advice. So definitely everything that's been echoed in this chat so far is great. So I think we can get started on the question in the Q&A right now. If people want to submit questions here, that's also great. If they also want to submit questions through WOVA, which is our conference platform, I'll be monitoring that. But I'll pass it off to Rahul right now. I think there's one question in the Q&A.
Okay. What specific advice would you give to someone who is interested in entering the biotech field?
Yeah, I think I can take that one. So it really depends on what your starting position is, right? And everything's just going to depend on that. So if you're an undergrad or like a graduate student, it'll be different. So if you're a graduate student, you're tied to a university, you have to work in a lab. Maybe you can get your mentor involved, and just get him excited, get her excited, and just like just get started on the research, on the idea. The VCs or the venture capital are generally very interested, and there's ways to go about it. Something that you really start with is called pre-seed, and it's just a little bit of money to get your idea going. But if you're in a university, you can also write a grant. So NIH has this SBIR as well as NSF, which is basically an industry grant. You can go that route. There's a lot of different private foundations that will give you grants. I mean, and it's varied, right? It's medical, it's agriculture, it's science, it's everything. So it really depends on your starting position. But let's say you don't have a university contact, you don't have a lab, then I think you're just you have a few choices still. You can go for pre-seed. Especially if you have a really good idea, and Y Combinator as well as IndieBio in the biotech field are a couple of really good incubators that will, give you a little money to start. Otherwise, you can always, if you have a choice of doing a friends and family and you really believe in that idea, you can get started that way. But it really depends on your starting position.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that answer. Alrighty, I have a question from WOVA, which is, what if I'm unsure about what type of career I want to have? How do I explore different career paths? And what advice would you give to someone who enjoys scientific research but doesn't know what they want to do necessarily moving forward? And again, anybody can take that.
I can also start. I can also answer that. If you're not interested, I think just try it out. I was a pharmacist before anything, and then I thought that I wanted to do research. So I went into to do a master's in pharmacology, where in one of my exams, they were talking about a plasmid, and I'm like, what is a plasmid? Which is basically a circular piece of DNA, right? So I went ahead and did a PhD in genetics. And at some point, my mentors told me that, oh, I have to go into academia. But, I decided to try something else out. I think there are a lot of routes that you can go by. And a lot of times you don't have to go to grad school. But again, it really depends. So for me, the grad school, trying out different things during my PhD, I found a lab where there was a lot of freedom. I tried a lot of different things. It was of natural interest to me. So I wouldn't say expertise, but experience in doing a lot of different things. And then I knew what I wanted to do, and I focused a little bit during my postdoctoral work. You can get a similar experience, not doing a PhD or going into an industry and just learning on the job, but then you're a little bit narrow because your job may be narrow. But try to be open to a lot more experiences. Try it out. Carve a path for yourself. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. Yeah, that's it. Just try it out.
Awesome. Does anybody have anything they want to add to that?
Sure, I can add. It's okay. So it's probably worth saying that. You're probably of the 98% majority, and if other people are saying they know what they're doing, they're probably either lying or wrong. There's a really good TED talk by Emily Wapnick, I want to say, called something about multi-potentialites. It's a fancy word that I always liked when I thought of that. When I heard that, I realized that's what I am I like one thing and I like to really get good at that. And then, I like to do the next thing, get really good at that. And you just may be that type of person, and it's okay. It may directly interfere with you sitting down with your PhD and going, this is what I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life. But the truth is, if you look at this panel right now, Dr. Batra is not a supervisor, not a PI at a university, and Dr. Roberts and Dr. Hoffman take different paths. So it doesn't mean that you're going to be locked in, although it kind of feels like that. So it's okay. That's the first thing I'd say. And you do really want to try some different things. I think that talk by Emily Wapnick will talk through some of that. Interview your PIs, like treat it. That was one of the things. I didn't know any different. So I did what I thought was right because I was working at the time. So I didn't talk to any other academic students, but I went in and interviewed my PIs. So, okay, what am I getting out of this relationship? Why do why are you the right person for me? and you want to build in flexibility, because I know a lot of folks get stuck in a lab that's really tight and hard to maneuver in. And if you think you're a person that you're not sure where you want to go, and that's a great lab if you know where you want to go and that's what you want to do. But if you don't know, then that's probably not the right environment for you. So you may want to pass up on one type of opportunity for one that's more flexible in a academic environment.
Awesome answer.
Yeah, I think I want to add, to that. I think Chris put it really well. And I recently watched this Pixar movie called Soul. And I don't know if you've watched it, but I really highly recommend it. All I wouldn't disclose anything in the movie, but do what you love, right? So, for example, if you really like to play music and you're stuck in biotech, you can really choose your industry. Go for big pharma. You fit yourself into the role that you're most interested in, and believe me, if you really love what you're doing, you'll get that role. Then maybe you can join a quartet in the industry. I'm just trying to tell you that there's so much flexibility that you can really choose what you want to do. It may be hard to get the right job in the beginning, but if you really pursue that and make the right contacts, make the right mentors, I think you could do that.
I also just want to add another note on just trying things out in a low stakes manner, if possible. That would be, internships, fellowships, jobs you only plan on being in for a year or two. That's okay when you're starting out. Even if you do commit, if you are sure that you want to get the PhD, but you're still not sure, you got the field, but maybe not the subfield. Going for a type of program that'll allow you to do rotations is a great idea. Usually that's, take the first year, 3 or 4, you do 3 or 4 different rotations in different labs and figure out, okay, I knew the program, but I didn't know exactly who I wanted to work with. That's the way you figure that out. I know, for example, with my husband, who also is a PhD in biotech, actually, he didn't know, he applied for certain programs, but he didn't know until he went on his interviews and got to go to, multiple different campuses, talk with tons of people. That was when he figured out what he wanted his specific discipline to be in that field. And then he got to do rotations and figure out who his advisor was going to be. So that's okay. And that can happen. But I also want to give a word of caution that grad school is surprisingly high stakes. There's like a lot of opportunity cost for doing a PhD, and I'm speaking financially, but in a lot of other areas too. And so if you're really not certain about doing the PhD, hold off and get more experience and get more view of the world before really committing to that, because it seems low stakes because it's just more school or whatever, but there is a high opportunity cost to finishing, being in graduate school for that long and having a low salary for that long.
Amazing. Dr. Hoffman, anything to add at all?
Yeah, I'll just echo the comment about don't be afraid to try things. I changed my career a number of times. I mean, it's just, you need to go forward and not look back and not be afraid and be confident. When I left academia, I loved my job. I had a fantastic job, but I left for personal reasons. It was a very difficult choice for me, but things just kept getting better and better for me. And so just have faith, And I think Ranjan, hit it on the head. You try lots of different things, and then eventually you'll find your fit. So just don't be afraid to try things. Something else, to dabble in, if I don't know what level people are in here. Is everyone a graduate student, or do we have people who are in high school or
Mainly undergrads. So.
Undergrads? You know, the iGEM competition. You know, you want to think you might be interested in biotech, but you don't know, and you can join one of those iGEM teams, and the kids who do it, I think, have a blast, and I think they're very, Emily mentioned internships. There are a number of ways to find out, to stick your foot in the water and see how cold it is.
Yes, for sure. And I can also attest to iGEM. I did iGEM in high school and I really enjoyed that. So it's a great program.
Maggie, I just wanted to add, like, if people are interested in biotech and they're looking for internships and things like that, and they really want to, be inventors and things like that, there are other resources. For example, if you're in the Massachusetts area, you have Flagship Pioneering. It's basically a group of it's a venture capital, but they have their own labs and they fit people into jobs, and you can try it out. And of course, Google Life and other Google subsidiaries or companies associated with Google have a lot of undergrad internships. If you're in the San Francisco Bay Area, you have Third Rock and other such venture capital training, venture capital companies that you can get fit into.
Yeah, lots of opportunities out there for undergrads, which is a great thing. So I think now is a wonderful time to explore career opportunities. Alrighty, so we're reaching our time, but I wanted to end with our quote unquote fun question, which is, what is, a brief fun memory or a brief memory that stood out to you in your career thus far that, you hold close to your heart, maybe?
Yeah, I can start. There's lots from since I finished my PhD. There's not as many from before I finished my PhD for some reason, but I don't know what that's about. What comes to mind is the first time somebody sent me a picture. They were in the audience in a presentation in Japan, and there was a big picture of my face from my podcast, and then a bunch of Japanese writing beside it on a slide deck. Somebody was giving it a presentation. I had no clue what this meeting was or what the Japanese text said, but I hope it was nice things about the podcast. So it's kind of a fun thing. I think back to it, always makes me smile. So don't be afraid to put yourself out there. It sounds self-serving for me to say online, because that's what I've been doing for the last number of years, but probably everyone's going to be on. I think all the putting yourself out there is going to be online here shortly anyway, certainly as COVID continues. But it's really about communication. So don't be scared to go out there and communicate with people, talk to people, make connections, get mentors, and you'll see crazy things come back to you, including, I don't know, Japanese letters and pictures of yourself. And put good pictures of yourself online if you're gonna. You better be happy with the picture if you're gonna see it in that circumstance. So I'll end with that.
For sure.
One of my memories, so I've had a lot of fun memories, and I probably won't talk about that. I had a memory that's like, at that time it was painful, but now it's a lot of fun. So I was doing developmental research, and for those who know, developmental research is really hard. So you have to basically study a lot of embryos, right? And it's really hard. So I collected a bunch of embryos. It took me days, and I made a protein extract, and I wanted to test that, and I wanted to know the answer then. And I was awake for 48 hours straight. I hadn't had any sleep, and I loaded it onto the gel, and then I finally went for lunch. And I came back and I realized that I had run the gel opposite. So all the hard work was gone. And at that time, it was probably the most painful memory. But now I look back at it and it's fun. The lesson that I learned, that even though sometimes you'd really want to work hard, sometimes, you're just basically kind of just fixated on the bench. Sometimes these things really in a big picture don't matter that much. Just pace your research, have fun with it. Don't just get your head stuck in the lab or whatever. But of course, I'm not telling you not to work hard, but sometimes you get fixated on very small things.
Yeah, I can relate to the gel thing. That's happened multiple times to me. So that brought back a lot of memories for me too. All right, Dr. Roberts or Dr. Hoffman?
Yeah, so I brought this up earlier, but the first time that I spoke publicly about, it wasn't the first time I spoke, but it was the first time I spoke about personal finance, something I was really passionate about. It was just so thrilling to me. And I get to re-experience that thrill every time I speak publicly about that subject. And so I would just say the advice around that is find something that thrills you and figure out a way to pursue that as your career. I had no idea at that point how you get paid for speaking or how to make your speaking your job, but I went and figured it out after that point, once I knew that that was that thrilling thing that was gripping me.
Something that I still think fondly about, I was a young professor and I had a project that was an exciting project, and the lab had a protein that we knew it was complex to another protein, and we had been working for a couple of years to try to pull out this other protein in the mixture, and we were not successful. But one thing that I had been doing in the lab, I would always describe what we were. I wasn't waiting for the final result. So, I had described the system, and we had put out that there was this protein factor we were looking for. And out of the blue, someone from France called me up, and he said he thinks he knows what this protein is. And, we talked a little bit before about collaborations. This was just became a fantastic collaboration. He was very open and we were very trusting. He sent me his reagents, and we were able in one day to get to that point of having the factor, and it really completed the story. It turned out to be a very interesting story, and we collaborated for a number of years after that. He came to the US and I went to France. So it was a very, very warm experience.
Awesome. I love the themes that are appearing in this panel of collaboration and mentorship and going for what you're passionate about. It's great. So I just wanted to say on behalf of the conference planning team and all of our attendees, thank you so much to all of our wonderful speakers for spending some time with us today and for sharing all of their wisdom. We really, really appreciate it. And we just hope that you have a great weekend and a good start to the new year. So thank you so much all for dropping in today.
Yeah, good luck to everyone.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone.